Okay, good evening everyone. Thank you for coming along. It's a wee bit short notice this meeting was organised. I introduce you to Robbie the Pict, a man of no mean experience in challenging legalities of the law and especially the Skye Bridge tolls. So I think it's a fairly interesting evening, or a little while ahead of us tonight, to find out exactly what I think Robbie's uncovered, and we're going to have it, I think we're filming this as well, so we'll hopefully we'll be able to use that in the future as well. But it's all about what Robbie's going to tell you tonight, not me standing here, so there will be an opportunity for any questions as well afterwards. So over to you, boss.
Thank you very much. And thank you for coming. And it's a pity about the 3 buses on the A7 that broke down with the rest of the crowd, but you were very brave. I'm going to make a couple of preliminary remarks. Are there any toll protesters here? Yeah? Just to get through. Excellent. We have survivors from that particular event. Okay, well, I'm delighted that some of us are still alive. We have a few who've passed and a few deserve special mentions, like Donnie and Katrina McDougall, Alex Smith, Hugh Mackenzie, and my late partner Stella Anderson. I mentioned them on the first night, and it's worth mentioning them again, because we mustn't forget that we have a responsibility to carry on fighting an injustice, and now we must do it on their behalf as well. So, what's the purpose of this meeting? Well, I can now announce that after only 30 years, I have completed the legal research and can show that the tolling regime was totally unlawful. This has dramatic results for everyone concerned. All convictions must be quashed. Compensation must be paid for wrongful prosecutions, and the money that's handed out by way of compensation must include compensation for those convicted. Not only do you quash the convictions, but you pay compensation, because it's a wrongful prosecution, and I can now show that. And I have taken the time to be careful, because I'm an amateur, so I can't afford to be wrong. You know, I must be absolutely dead right when it comes to arguing this case in law. And even though they get rid of me, the value of this recording and last night's recording is that there will be something on record that our friends and families can pick up on and say there was malpractice here. So, I've had a couple of civil lawyers, you know, say, move on, you know, when we dragging its old hat. There's plenty of other things on the island that need more attention, and that's born of laziness and ignorance, because the things that need attention on the island nearly all involve money, and if we get the money back for this, we're now, which we will do, we're now talking about starting at 150 million and possibly up to 250. when you see the compensation that's been dished out down south, this dwarfs it. There is a lot of money due to this neighbourhood. We have been ripped off and robbed. I'm going to embark on the legal stuff, and I want us to be confident and brave about this. If there's anything you think is out of order, don't go on YouTube or any of these mediums and say swearies. You know, all we do is we say small village in Chechnya. That's our code. Right? A wee village in Chechnya. So that's relatively harmless, but you'll find out eventually on the QT what that means. So can we have a practice? This is all perfectly innocent and kosher.
Small village in Chechnya.
A wee village in Chechnya. You'll have to be louder than that so we'll pick up.
A wee village in Chechnya.
That's it, you're getting the idea. It's sort of like pantomime. You know, they've been taking the mick for long enough, and so we can play the game too. So we have to learn to protect ourselves because they've made it extreme now to try and speak freely. You know, they want to clamp down. They is London. We don't know who's pulling the strings, we can guess, but it's affecting Scotland adversely. And we have the right to not only defend ourselves, we have a duty to defend ourselves, but we have to keep in mind that our kids, you know, who are under 16 just now, perhaps, they haven't a clue that their parents have been ripped off, that there is money of enormous amounts and wrongdoing has gone on in this community, which will result in the paying back of that money. So there's millions, tens of millions, and I would put it almost $250 million in total. I think it could go up to 250 million, but certainly 125, you know. The only good thing about it being so long ago is compound interest at 6%, index linked, doubles the 65, 75 million we know they took. There was a brown envelope on top of that, which I think complied with the requirements of the civil contract. They've never said how much extra they paid off, and that's a question that hangs in the air, that remains. So, we'll move on to the nitty-gritty here. Now, bear with me, because I will explain the hard bits, and I don't expect people to understand constitutional road law. I mean, most of you skipped that when you were in primary school. But we'll have a go at it, and we'll do the simple version. Now, I should tell you that road tolling had been banned in Scotland. We didn't have road tolling, and that was a result of an act called the Roads and Bridges Scotland Act of 1978 at section 33. So that's now on record. Roads and Bridges Scotland Act, section 33, and it was a national ban for the whole Kingdom of Scotland. So it was good for a considerable period and part of our tradition. This national ban was in place until it was repealed mysteriously by the Roads Scotland Scotland Act in 1984, and it was tucked away at the end, hidden in repeals. The 1878 Roads and Bridges Scotland Act, and who goes and looks up the repeals at the end of an act, that they can't find, they can't buy, and, a thing like this, who pays £16.40 and goes to, the repeals section and digs it out? I mean, it's beyond the ken of most people. I'll show you in a minute what that act is like. So, the national ban was killed off in 1984 by this act, saying it was a Scotland Act. Now, if any MP had been paying attention, he would have said, wait a minute, that removes our ban on road tolling. That means you can introduce road tolling. Nobody noticed, nobody checked this out at all. So they've been in default, they've not been doing their job. Now this act in '84 was 7 years prior to the passing of something called the New Roads and Streetworks Act of 1991. The New Roads and Streetworks Act 1991 is worth remembering because it reintroduced tolling. It made tolling by private finance initiative possible. What's private finance initiative? Where a private company gets their hands into the public purse and starts being a financial middleman. Things can be built by the government, but private companies get to build all of it or part of it and charge the government. And this was a Thatcher brainwave, although in this particular case, it was the follow-on, the next Prime Minister after Thatcher, the wee man who kicked in this act against Skye, Major. So, what you've got there is Westminster arrogantly bypassing the Scottish Parliament. Now, somebody has done away with the ban and sat for 7 years and thought, right, that's them calmed down, no one's reacted to that. We'll reintroduce tolling. That sounds like a good idea. Yeah, sure for them. So that the problem with that was there was no reaction in Edinburgh. Edinburgh just went that by. It just drifted right over their heads. No one was paying attention at all. So that manoeuvre went unchallenged in Edinburgh. So we can ask questions there. So we get to their failings, and there were new requirements for creating a road tolling regime in Scotland. They introduced the introduction of the 91 Act, can I call it that now, the New Roads and Streetworks Act, we're saying that all the time, the 91 Act, UK Act. It created an unprecedented international hybrid of required legislation. It put a grab down, if you want, that embraced Scots law and English law and just pushed them together. Right, we'll just do that and call that road tolling, and it's reintroduced. So, to me, that was an assault on the Kingdom of Scotland's integrity and its traditions, and no one said anything about that either. None of our Scottish MPs were on the ball, none of them were paying attention. I don't know what the distractions are in Westminster, I don't care, but they don't serve us well if they can take our MPs' eyes off the ball. I don't know if they're getting fed extra burgers, free wine, cheap whiskey, I don't know. Anyway, it's not good enough. So, what I've tried to do is distill this down to the essence. Instead of having a public inquiry, which goes on for weeks and examines all these articles and people are paid high wages to argue about this, I've distilled it down. So the essence of this is down to 3 documents. So you'll have to bear with me on this and I'll explain each of the 3 documents. The first one is a special road scheme. It's under Scottish legislative requirements and it's contained in Section 7 of the Roads Scotland Act. Now, the Roads Scotland Act has just got Scotland in brackets. It was made in Westminster. That's the one that damaged, it repealed the 1878 Act. So it's not really fair to call it the Roads Scotland Act. It didn't take consideration of Scotland's requirements. That's one item, the special road scheme. Second item is a toll order, unheard of in Scotland since 1878. None of our grannies will remember a toll order. That's just wasn't on the roads in Scotland. But under Section 27, Part 2 of the United Kingdom's New Roads and Streetworks Act, I'm only making sure that those who want to pursue examination have got that detail properly, in 1991, toll orders were reintroduced. And the third document I would like you to keep in mind, if I'm not testing your patience here, is a thing called an assignation statement. An assignation statement. So it's a document that's making some kind of declaration about presumably who the toll is allowed to be collected by. You know, it's saying this power, and it is a power, stopping a vehicle and demanding money on a Scottish road, this power is being lawfully assigned to. And that's what that statement, that's the purpose of that statement. And it must identify properly exactly who is being given these policing powers, financial policing. You can't go any further unless you pay £5. And if you're a truck, that'll be £18. And if you're a big truck, that'll be £30. And if you're a bus, that'll be £60. What? This is a tourist island. We live dependent on buses. We need buses. What about buses going back and forth? Oh, it's £40 odd each way. So that's adding £80. Now, if you're a holiday company in Edinburgh, the visit to Skye involves another £80 worth of diesel. Wait a minute, you know, times are tricky enough as it is, that's ridiculous. So that's clear assault for the sake of ideological experimentation by Thatcher and Major. They want to test something out where it's safe. They can afford a loss because there's no Tories up here. You know, it was a Lib Dem operation. So they just, we'll try it there and see what happens. We'll experiment. So that's exactly what they did. however, they had a problem because somebody decent somewhere created assignation statement regulations. Now, the document is called, and it's an order, it's subordinate legislation, so it has to come into effect. It's like a mini act of parliament. That's what this kind of document's called. And it was named the Assignation Statement, Prescribed Information, Scotland, Regulations. Now, for anybody who's bored at night, the statutory instrument, the mini act of parliament reference, is 1991 stroke 2152 brackets S177. Now that's extremely important because it controls the requirements for demanding a toll. So somebody was paying attention, somebody was saying this should be done in lawful and decent order. Now there was many other breaches. There were side road orders, the authority to erect a tolling collection office, there was a requirement for an alternative route, and that had to be certified. An alternative route had to be within 5 miles of the bridge. Now, where was that going to be? It had to be 5 miles either side to allow you to avoid the tolls. The law says there must be an alternative route. I asked Lord James Douglas Hamilton, excuse me, Hammy, where's the alternative route here as required by law? And he said, back across the bridge and you've got to Alpo, you can get a ferry there and come down, perfectly simple. What world do you live in, Andy? Well, that's the alternative route within 5 miles. A trip round to Liverpool. And what's that costing? You may not get on a ferry. Everybody here knows what it's like trying to go Liverpool, Stornoway and all that kind of stuff. You need a place to camp on most occasions. It's a nightmare. And that was the Minister of Transport for Scotland. There's your alternative route. Try and look at. And eventually I pressed him on this, and he said, "Well, look, that roundabout's got plenty of exits. Aye, one down to Saucy Mary's, one up the back of Killarkin." To a dead end, and you're way up the woods. And which one is the alternative route? And where does it go? And how does it go? Well, didn't answer. Just got his bodyguards together who were watching like hawks. Well, that's getting difficult for the minister. We'll pull the plug here. So they just said, the minister's leaving now. So I'm still looking for the alternative route that isn't via Liverpool and Stornoway. You can't do that. The Act says there must be an alternative route and it must be certified. And that's a requirement for those paying attention to the legal stuff. Section 32 of the 91 Act. Section 32 of the 91 Act says there must be an alternative route within 5 miles within 5 miles and free of toll or ferry. So, still looking for that. Anyway, none of the above requirements, and I'll take you back to Special Road Scheme Toll Order and Licence, called the Assignation Statement, none of these are in proper order. They were not met, the requirements were not met in lawful or proper form. Absolutely no attempt was made to produce either the assignation statement or the alternative route certificate. The assignation statement being the most important. So, I had a look at what they produced as a special road scheme, and I had a look at what they turned up and called a toll order, and neither one was signed or even rubber stamped on behalf of the Secretary of State for Scotland and with his seal of state indicating legislation. They just didn't have any impression or impact or input, that's what I'm looking for, from the Secretary of State for Scotland. He's the only person in Scotland who can officially issue legislation, subordinate or otherwise, because he's a minister of the Crown, down the road there. So what we got then was far short, but I'll come back to that because it's quite interesting what they tried to do. The New Roads and Street Works Act, which I've just complained about, it says refusing or failing to pay a toll without a reasonable excuse in section 38(1), as everybody knows, became law. They created a law saying if you don't have a good excuse, you can't refuse to pay a toll, or you commit a crime. And that sounds a wee bit heavy-handed. They're steaming into us here with new enforcement laws. But there was a lovely section before it, section 37. So refusing to pay was introduced by 38(1). So I checked when I eventually got hold of an act which I kept back for months. I checked this and read in the preceding section, demanding a toll without authority is equally a crime. That's section 37 4A of the 91 Act. So you've got two new crimes: not having the proper paperwork in order is criminal, and refusing to pay a toll without a reasonable excuse is criminal. So who evaluates a reasonable excuse? So I suggested at the legal meetings of Skye, we need a reasonable excuse that will stand up. So let's go back to what the demands were. There must be an alternative route. The documentation must include a license, and this material must be produced by or on behalf of the Secretary of State for Scotland. Now, if he in Langdon decided he has a permanent Undersecretary with a rubber stamp, he's allowed to use Lang's rubber stamp. So that would have been acceptable in the circumstances to fulfill that requirement. Couldn't find that at all. So what we did find was simulated, that's the word I was looking for, a simulated special road scheme, typed out in an office, not in the normal format, which is Times New Roman, but in a alternative, I don't even remember what it was, but it was one of these Cagliari or some kind of type form, and it was just a draft. It was just rattled up, an informal document, and it was signed by a deputy roads engineer. A deputy roads engineer. Since when were they made Secretary of State? You're having a laugh. A deputy roads engineer was making law on behalf of supposedly Westminster and applying it illegally in Scotland, which is absolutely appalling. I looked at the other paperwork, that was a special road scheme, looked at the toll order, read that, and it's in the same draft type courier or something like that. And I get to the end page, and the toll order gives I think it had 10 pages of rates of vehicles, what they were charging for the various vehicles. And then at the end, it just finished. It wasn't signed. You know, so where's the Secretary of State or his deputy's sign stamp? Not there. This paperwork was not in lawful order. James Innes had signed, he's a deputy roads engineer, he had signed both on behalf of the Secretary of State. That is absolutely appalling. They are taking the Bible. You know, they cannot be let off for that. So, I then got hold eventually of the supposed assignation statement. And the assignation statement drafted out what the requirements were, all very much in favour of let me get this right, Skye Bridge Tolls Limited. Skye Bridge Tolls Limited, they were allowed to collect the money on the main road. So I looked up who Skye Bridge Tolls Limited were, and they were a temporary fix. They had 3 £1 shares. It was a £3 company. And this is meant to be a company that's selected on the basis of their experience and their courtesy with the public and their correctness and all that kind of stuff. And they're worth £3, and they were made the week before, or very recently. So I thought, well, that's not good enough. That doesn't work. That does constitute, going back to the requirements, a reasonable excuse. We have the basis for refusing to pay because we have a reasonable excuse. You don't have any paperwork. You're not in lawful order. You're out of order because you're hitting us with criminal consequences. You're charging us wrongly, you know, for drawing attention to your shortcomings. So take aye, sunshine. I didn't quite say that, but you know what I mean. So I looked at the requirements of a special road scheme. Now, unlike in England, might as well start with one of them. Start with the one that's basically Scottish and is their biggest Achilles heel. Unlike in England, that item of subordinate legislation had to be produced under Scots law, as contained in Section 7 of the Scotland Act 1984. I'm repeating that again because you do repeat things again. That's the definition of repeat, isn't it? Section 7 says, a scheme under this section authorising the provision of a special road shall, in the case of a road to be provided by the Secretary of State, be made by the Secretary of State. The scheme shall be made by the Secretary of State. Under the Interpretation Act, the Secretary of State is defined. The Secretary of State for Scotland is someone, he's a Crown Minister, and he's the only Scottish Crown Minister that sits in the intimate circle in London. So Ian Lang, by law, had to apply either his signature or his undersecretary with his seal. If Lang applied it, he had to put his seal on it as well. It had to be signed and sealed by one of these two individuals. Not James Innes, Deputy Roads Engineer. You're having a laugh again. Meanwhile, this section, Section 7, has to be read with Section 27, 4 and 5 of the 91 Act. Now, please bear with me here, because this is important. Section 27.4 of the New Roads and Streetworks Act, new PFI, says the proceedings required by Part 2 of Schedule 1 to this Act to be taken for the purposes of a toll order, alright, toll order proceedings, so far as practicable, must be taken concurrently with the proceedings required to be taken for the purpose of a special road scheme. So they're twins, they have to be working together and produced as near as possible at the same time. And that's the special road scheme authorising the provision of the road to which the toll order relates. So the public have to see that these two things are twins. Section 27.5, and I'll stop doing law soon. The Secretary of State shall not make or confirm the scheme or the toll order unless he makes or confirms them both. Making is he does it with his signature and stamp. Confirming is if the local roads authority, which would be the Highland Council, if they draft it all out and prep it, then it has to be stamped and approved by the Secretary of State. So he can't do the scheme without the order, they must travel together. So there you have it. There's an expression that Jimmy Fraser used, Sheriff Jimmy Fraser, for those who don't remember his noble self. May he rest in peace or rot in hell or whatever they do. The wonderful Jimmy, he was a bit special, like enough. He came out with Latin phrases and all kinds of response to these things, and he was fond of picking something out of ancient Italian to shout at us, and we were all to sit there in ignorance going, right Jimmy, that'll be fine, bellissimo, wonderful, you know. Now, I've got a Latin phrase for Jimmy, falsus in uno, falsus in omnibus. That is a maxim that's used in law as well, Jimmy, and I've got an O-level Latin. So, you know, take note, falsus in uno, falsus in omnibus. What does that mean? That means that if you you've got one flaw in a legal construction, in a constitutional arrangement, if there's one duff brick, the whole building comes down. So both of these items of legislation are the sole prerogative of Ian Lang. They must both bear the seal of the Secretary of State, and this didn't happen. So you've got falsus in duro, Jimmy. So definitely falsus in omnibus. So the supplementary paper is hereby certifying that this document is a local and private non-print. And we go, a local and private non-print, that's avoiding examination by Parliament. Local and private non-prints apply to things like church paths. It's a wee road, but it's not on the main grid. It's not a national road, and it's certainly not a trunk road, as was advertised. In November 95, I think it was. No, it had been before that, I can't even remember exactly, but the statutory notices that went out advertising our Brave New World, PFI road scheme, they talked about the A87 extension, Skye Bridge crossing. That's what the notices said in the papers. That's what we were all told we were getting. A proper A87, that's a trunk road, extension onto Skye. So, a local and private non-print church path doesn't cut it. So I'll move from that. That's enough of that. You've been very brave, patient, thank you. And we'll address what happened when we took these Jimmy appeals. Jimmy's attitude was, find them guilty and let somebody else deal with this, no having that, I'm retiring soon. So that's what he did. When we said, well, I had a reasonable excuse, they just grouped 12 charges, guilty or not guilty. Well, on charge one, I tried to, I'm not interested. Guilty or not guilty. That was the way it was dealt with in Dingwall, which was appalling. And Jimmy just washed his hands, basically. Somebody else is going to have to sort this, and it's not going to be me. He didn't like the look of the tolling legislation at all. So we got certain responses. In Edinburgh, those appealing for justice fared no better. Lord Sutherland, who's the main ruling that they rely on, and they say, Lord Sutherland says, Lord Sutherland says. So we have to look at Lord Sutherland and what he did say. Meanwhile, he was packing his bags for Camp Zeist and taking on the nice high-profile Lockerbie trial. However, in the 3 weeks while he was doing his bag-packing for Holland, he supposedly released an opinion. Your sub machine, Ranald. You can release an opinion in 3 weeks on the Skye Bridge and still get ready for Camp Zeist. That's an achievement of monumental dimensions. He was chummed on the bench by 2 members of a secret sodality, 4 other members of which had been architects and financiers of the tolling road scheme. Their particular roles, and I'll name them in a second, belong in the world of finance and politics. That's beyond the scope of this particular report. My job was, that I took on was, well, let's find out what the law is and work from there. But I've stuck to that. I haven't got into the political arena, other than make some small mischief. So, what I did do was I took Lord Sullivan's ruling to a forensic writing analyst, and I did this at my own expense. This chap immediately separated the styles of 3 persons contributing to the Sutherland opinion. He says 3 individuals have written this. Now this guy does this for a living and he worked for the Crown. So he could spot tone, flavour, feel in any document at all. Well, he was Scotland's expert at that. And he only looked at it for 10-15 minutes. I went to his house and he said, there's 3 contributors to this. And I said, are you sure? I'm not being cheeky, but are you sure? Because it's important. And I said, no, stand on me, that's what I do. This is a composite. He said, but I can only tell you that privately, otherwise I'll lose my job. I'm the main man, when it comes to interpretation of documents. He is the forensic writing analyst for Scotland, or was at that time. So he said, you have to promise me that you keep that private until I'm away. And he just said, I'm away. He didn't say away from the job or away in the grave or anything, he just said, until I'm away. But take it from me, there's 3 writers in that particular appeal ruling, that opinion. So, that opinion had another piece of ancient Italian that we were all to respect and genuflect to, and it was issued by Lord Manrich as a supplementary to the Sutherland opinion. Lord Manrich's a member of the SPEC again. Oh, I was going to tell you about other SPEC members, I'll just fit that in. Sir Ian Noble and a banker from Edinburgh, his name will come back to me, and a civil servant in the Scottish office who was a member, and Lord James Douglas Hamilton, the Minister of Transport, he was a member as well of this sodality. So there was getting to be an odour, and it wasn't of sanctity, it was just an odour. So, to go back to Lord Manrich and his attempt to teach us all discipline in ancient Italian, he said, this particular phrase cannot be underestimated. The importance of this phrase cannot be underestimated. He called it a maxim. The importance of this maxim cannot be underestimated. And the maxim was, omnia rite et solemniter acta praesemuntur Now, for those who've forgotten their O-level and the higher Latin, that translates as all acts must be presumed to be or to have been completed in proper order. All acts must be presumed to have been completed in proper order. And I thought, with my long-tested O-level Latin, that doesn't sound right. That's suspicious. So I checked it up, and I found that the Latin maxim continues. It's followed by donec probitur in contrarium. Donec probitur in contrarium completes that Latin maxim, of which he gave us half. And the second half that I've just quoted, donec, it means unless the contrary is proved. So their suggestion was that we hadn't proved that everything was in proper order. We've produced documents that are not signed by the Secretary of State or any of his lackeys, and we've demanded to see an assignation statement, and there isn't one. There's no signature on the assignation statement. It's 7 pages of anonymous type, as Professor Robert Black said in the P&J. Absolutely right. So, Marmach is deceiving the public badly by citing a legal maxim and applying it in an appeal case in Scotland to cover up for the wrongful and criminal imposition of tolls. Then we get to Lord Justice General Lord Cohen. Now, I think he might also have been a member of the spec. He was equally ignorant of Scots road law. He saw fit to deny any hearing which might re-examine the subtle of opinion. I went up to the door of a hearing supposedly called a petition to the noble office. It's a Scottish provision. It doesn't exist in England, and it echoes the right of the people to say, with all due respect, your lordship has made one of your lordships has made a mistake, and you used to be able to, under the petition to the noble office, you used to be able to take to the king and say, well, can you re-examine that? There's a gross injustice. Now, you'd probably pay a heavy price if you were wrong, but I was confident that we were right. So I pressed Lord Cullen on the right to that kind of hearing, the ancient, they call it a nobof, nobili officium, the king's noble office. I pressed him on the right to have a proper nobof, and they obviously didn't pass things down to the Queen, as the monarch was at that time. They intercepted it and decided they would deal with it. Wait a minute, the device here is that a higher power must examine your conduct, because I'm suggesting that you haven't done your job in law, and I can prove it. So Collins' approach was, I would call it slightly fascist. He just said, you're not getting a hearing. He just declared it incompetent. You can't have a hearing. He's got the door shut, slam. What are we dealing with here? these people are desperately covering up what was going on. The last attempt in court was in the civil arena, and I took it to the court session at my own expense. I didn't use SCAT funds. I liquidated my book stock on my own initiative because it was a risky business, and it was better that one person went down rather than the whole of the SCAT T-money. So when it came to Lord Easy, who heard this, he chose to ignore the requirements of the assignation statement regulations, and he declared that the contents of the assignation statement, a statutory document, were none of the public's business. What? Are you having a laugh again, Sunshine? Why do you have these regulations, subordinate regulations, items of law saying that there has to be a license and it has to be delivered in a certain way and so on? So it was refused on that basis. Lord Easy just completely ignored these requirements and said that I hadn't made a case. Now, that's terrible enough, but you would raise the question in my mind of how Lord Easy would respond in his camper van if he was coming up to Skye on a weekend and he was asked for £20 and he said, "What? Show me your paperwork," and they didn't have any. What would Lord Easy be thinking about that as a mode of conduct? He'd been unhappy, wouldn't he? That left one slightly obtuse challenge, and it applied, it came from a case that I raised on the M74. The M74 is meant to be underpegged by special road schemes. You have to make a base provision before you can up the national speed limit from 60 to 70. You need special paperwork, and again, they use a special road scheme. So I had a look at the M74. I couldn't find any special road schemes. They had built a motorway without doing the basic paperwork that was required before you could operate a motorway. That's astonishing. So I thought, right, well, let's run this and see what happens. So I did, I think, 80 miles an hour. They allow 10% over the 70, 77. And then there's a procurator of fiscal's discretion. And he said, on this particular stretch of the M74, well, we'll stick 3 miles on that. So anybody over 80, do them. So I did 81. Just as a matter of principle. I'm not driving recklessly. It's a 2 and sometimes 3 lane road. So I just did the minimum to tickle, to kick in a conviction. Julie got my conviction, said to the police, "You don't have a special road scheme, therefore you can't set up a speed limit." And they, you're getting charged. Friend, us expect that by that time. I went to the local sheriff court, argued my case. No, they weren't entertaining it at all, just permanently in denial. The constitutional argument wasn't examined at all. And it finished up in front of Carloway. Now, he eventually became the Lord Justice General, but at that time he was Lord Chief Justice and second on top, and he was handling appeals. And Carloway didn't have any answer at all. He just condemned my action, querying the absence of subordinate legislation. And he got carried away with himself. He, like every other judge in Edinburgh, was very weak on road legislation. It's not one you make any profit from. You just sit in the back room and you work away for the Highland Council or whatever. You don't become a millionaire doing functional road legislation. You do become a millionaire by representing people, landowners, and having arguments and civil disputes. You make lots of money doing that. And that was Carloway's background. So when it came to, he was probably embarrassed when it came to road law, he hadn't a clue. So he just slagged me, he was, I would say he was abusive, for querying the necessary subordinate legislation. That's called an ad hominem attack, more ancient Latin. It just means you're attacking the man, you're attacking the messenger, ad hominem. That opinion, interestingly enough, has never been removed from the official website. Oh, why is that then? Because it's blatantly wrong. Okay, we get to the last paragraph, the big question. What went wrong with the private finance experiment in Scotland? How did the dream of Thatcher and Major dash itself on the rocks in such a spectacular fashion at the Isle of Skye? The answer lies back in Edinburgh. A civil servant at that time, by the name of Fiona Drummond, was permanently attached to the Secretary of State Ian Lang's section of the Scottish office with a chap called David Nash. Such a person was responsible for ensuring that any legal acts due to be performed by the minister were carried out in accordance with the law of Scotland. That was her job. Don't sign that, minister, it needs checked. Right, okay, you can sign it. Now, as a daughter of a respected sheriff, there is no history of public failure until 1991, when we come to the requirements surrounding the erection of the Skye crossing. Miss Drummond failed to recognise that Scots law made different demands, which we all know now. The special road scheme is a Scottish device, it has Scottish requirements. They're different from the requirements in England. So, I've already told you what has to happen about signs and seals and Secretary of State. Miss Drummond's office, I can't say if it was her herself, failed to ensure that this requirement was properly met. The entire private finance experiment over the Kyle is thus exposed as unlawful and perhaps even criminal. Miss Drummond was has nonetheless enjoyed rapid promotion. At that time, the Office for Parliamentary Counsel, an English device but duplicated in Scotland, and she was in that office. She's now a senator of the College of Justice and acts as a judge. She's a judge. Lorna Allison Drummond has been made a judge after, I think, probably only 12 years or so as what used to be a QC, now a KC. So, I'm not exactly sure if her or David Nash cleared the Skye Bridge, but Edinburgh lawyers, being what they are, they're ignorant of roads legislation. It's a very poorly paid enterprise. And it's not a great career earner. So I would like Her Ladyship to come clean on this and say, could you re-examine your role in this affair and do a decent thing, because this has badly affected this neighbourhood. This is a serious assault on our quality of life and our business, and it removed tens of millions unlawfully, far more than the bridge cost, from this community. We've got better things to do with our money than hand them over to American or English crooks, because it looks like a criminal operation. So I think, Lady Drummond, you have to do the decent thing now. You have to sort this, because you've caused it. It's down to you. You are the negress in the woodpile. I know you can't use other words nowadays, but that's an old-fashioned phrase, and I don't know if I can get hung for that now, but it's down to you, Fiona. We'd like you to do something about it. So do the decent thing. We'll give you the chance. You were young, but we're just oozing with Christian decency up here. So we'd like you to make an interim payment of £20,000 to all who were prosecuted, and we'd like £50,000 to be given immediately to all convicted for each and every conviction. Each conviction is wrong in law and must be properly compensated. Now, you're probably going to go, aye, right, no chance. If you do that, we will step up the pressure on you, and we have the right to do that. We have the right to defend ourselves in law. The Scottish heraldry says, in defence, we will defend ourselves. We're not threatening you, we're just saying we will continue because we're unhappy at legal abuse. Now, I've tested your patience sufficiently. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them. But there is no special road scheme, no toll order, and no licence, and that's a criminal offence. I rest my case. Thank you.
Well, that was a couple of days' work for you there. What can you say? Any questions? Anybody got any questions? It's been a long time since day one, when our first non-payment, Mr. McDougall actually forgot that we're meeting in Killacan and went to the barrier and wondered where everybody else was. But he was the first man to go through the barrier, purely by mistake. Because he didn't mean to be there, but anyway, that was crack. So, I think what we've heard is pretty competent stuff. And I think a lot of us, well, certainly 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us faced Jimmy Fraser on numerous occasions. He was an expert on golf law, by the way. Golf law.
Oh,
Jimmy, yeah. He worked for the Royal Navy for some time.
Jimmy did know some
golfing rules and regulations. He wrote some. Anyway, does anybody have any questions for Robbie? Yeah.
Yeah, hi Robbie. Thanks very much. That was really interesting. Just wondering, you said that you're going to try and seek compensation as a first port of call, as in 20,000 for those arrested or 50,000 for those convicted. If that doesn't prove to be successful, you said you'd then step up the pressure. What would that actually entail? What would the next steps be in that instance?
We step up the pressure in a variety of ways by publicising these discoveries. I mean, they've only come to light. The document that proves that herself, Lorna Drummond, was involved. I keep in this tube here, and I'm going to circulate this.
No, you're not. You can't.
I've never made a sailor. I can show you this, and it says, the law of Scotland shall apply to this agreement. That's the last line in the concession agreement. This is the one that they wanted to hide for 75 years. Why? Anyway, the law of Scotland shall apply to this agreement. And then they talk about, under those witnessing this, say that it's sealed by it's signed and sealed by the Secretary of State, who had subscribed, and it's subscribed on his behalf by James Innes. It's got James Innes's signature here as signing on behalf of the Secretary of State. There is James Innes, and witnessed and approved by two people up here, David Nash and Lorna Drummond. There's Lady Lorna smothering up. Gotcha. Right? They nailed Duchess. And it's got all the signatories: Peter John Hodgson, Hamish Wright Douglas, John Ridley, Taylor Carson. That's all Miller Civil Engineering and, all the contractors. This is a page from the concession agreement. And Lorna Drummond is described as a civil servant of the Scottish office. She's the advisor on constitutional matters to Ian Lang, and she's let that go. That was astonishing. Now, when I pressed them on this, they produced something called the Crown Production 16. Crown Production 16 was that much of a page, cut out, stuck on with other pages, and a composite was made by Miller's lawyer. He was given the job at QC, departed into the Great Beyonder or wherever dodgy QCs go, but there, Miller's QC knocked up a document called Crown Production 16, which was fake. Now, one thing Lord Easy did, was in his comments against me, saying it was not my business, it was none of the public's business. In his comments, he said, however, whatever Crown Production 16 is, it is not the authorised authority of the Secretary of State. So he shot himself in the foot, really, because he's given the game away. He said, this is a scam. And yet he wouldn't give me a judgment saying this is a scam. So, sorry, Lord DC, does not compute.
So, you're going to use that to put pressure on?
I'm going to use that to put pressure on a senator of the College of Justice. That will be uncomfortable for them because I can prove it. And it's not often you can take a judge by the short and curlies and rattle them around the wrestling ring. And especially if it's a lady, it wouldn't enter my mind.
Did John or sorry?
Yeah, it's similar to mine, so I think you probably answered it. It was in terms of the fact you mentioned not having a public inquiry, and why we not having a public inquiry, and why would that be just again the alternative to that?
Because of the scale of the scandal, it's so big. People are getting phone calls and being lawyers in Edinburgh and being told, drop this, leave it alone, don't help the Pict, he's a troublemaker, all kinds of stuff. I've got one lawyer left out of all kinds of people who thought they would help, and then they found out the scale of the scandal and faded away. Sorry, Robbie, I'm a bit busy just now, and so on.
By the way, when he mentioned Millers, it wasn't mine. It wasn't me. When he mentioned Millers, that were dodgy.
It's different spelling, it's M-I-L-L-E-R, are the bad guys.
Yeah,
A
make it clear.
completely different clan.
But one thing about when you don't know anything about the law is when somebody so esteemed as Professor Black came out and said what he said, that the paperwork was illegal, that everything was right. And he had been so respected that they used him at the Lockerbie inquiry. And yet, when he mentioned the Skye Bridge, he didn't know what he was talking about. So it makes you think, if you don't know anything about law, I know, Katie, you know a lot more about it than probably most people in the room, except maybe for the man here. But when somebody like that comes out, who was so well thought of to conduct the Lockerbie inquiry, and yet when he came up on the side of the Skye Bridge, the man didn't know what he was talking about. It makes you think, is there something funny going on? At least it made me think, and made one or two of us a wee bit sort of suspicious.
Yeah, and I can add that Professor Black's opinion was done, I had 3 days of discussing documents with him in Inverness, and we spent the time on that all day, and then we had a meal at night, and we might have had a drink, I don't know, I can't remember. And he was ready to say what he'd found on the Sunday morning for the Monday papers. So I organised a small press conference at the hotel we were staying at, and he hammered it. He just said, this is not unlawful order. In fact, it appeared on the front page of the Press and Journal as toll orders criminal, says constitutional expert. And you can go and look at that, it's in the P&J. Toll orders criminal, top man in Edinburgh, Professor Black, and as Drew says, so well thought of, he conducted or he instigated affairs in Lockerbie.
Yeah. So I think maybe the question, maybe still swirling around the room, is what next?
What next? I can't reveal what I'm up to.
Okay, I saw you asked.
No, you're entitled to ask, but there will be a next. And I'm not giving the game away just now. Some of it is formed in my mind, and some of it is still to form. But it'll be based on a fundamental flaw by a sitting judge. And this woman has to go, oh, mea culpa. More ancient Italian. They're good at it. I can play that game as well. Mea culpa is my blame. And that will be the way I'll start. Take that to Lorna Drummond and say, would you like to explain yourself, Lorna? You've dropped the ball here. You've dropped the ball. Lorna Allison, Allison, Drummond. From an established and respected family. Tack Drummond, T-A-K Drummond, is a sheriff now made up, I think he'll be a QC now. Casey, sorry. A thoroughly decent chap. And I think he needs to address this with his daughter and say, the only way out of this is to fess up and back a public inquiry, because you've made a mistake, it's going very pear-shaped, and they can prove it. Now, if they don't respect the fact that I don't give up, then they're stupid. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I'm ready to do the next 30. I may not do it all actively, but I'll certainly advise anybody who wants to study this issue, and I'll give them all the documentation that I've got in these cases here. And there's a whole lot more. I've distilled this down to 3 killer documents that nail them, absolutely nail them, and that's one of them. And cherchez la fin.
That's not Latin, is it?
No, it's French. I like to show my virtuos.
Yeah, you're very good, you're very good. Yeah, I honestly, you know, I think that the whole experience of the SCAT campaign was, I know some people say it's got nothing to do with Skye's history, but I think there were so many people from so many facets of life, shall we say, that took part in the SCAT campaign because they felt the injustice. And I think once the bridge, once everything was sort of shoved away in a corner, everybody thought that it would be forgotten about. But I think Robbie quietly has been working away for many, many years. And, you know, I think at the end of the day, I think we have to, at least I have to thank him, because he certainly gave me a lot of support when I was in front of Jimmy Fraser a few times, and Arthur. I think that, you know, I don't think these things should be forgotten, to be honest. I think that we all deserve transparency and justice. Though the statement that always sticks in my mind and will to the day I die was a statement from Jimmy Fraser in the Dingle Sheriff Court, when he said, when Callan McLean asked him, he said, "What are you looking for here, Mr. McLean?" And he said, "I'm looking for justice." And Sheriff Fraser said, "Justice? This is a court of law. You don't get justice here."
That's a good
and that stuck in my mind.
That's a great quote. I've forgotten that.
I forgot that one, so there we go. So, any other questions for Hugh?
The role of the civil service seems to be an undercurrent to your presentation. And I just wondered, was that something you felt that the civil service was being exerted pressure on from somewhere during the process, the different law changes through the decades?
I think in the Skye Bridge case, the ideology enforcement came from London.
Okay.
And I think that these particular civil servants, and if we must talk about Lorna Drummond, were probably steamrolled. I doubt if she knew anything about Scots road law. That wasn't her forte, and she didn't have time. She probably wasn't given time to go and read it, check it out, and it wasn't in her interest to be a fly in the ointment when the power of Thatcher and Major was bulldozing north looking for an experiment that would prove PFI getting private hands into public money was a good idea. That wasn't a good career move for Lorna Drummond, and you can understand that. And she'd be young, she hadn't yet been made an advocate. This job is a preliminary to advocacy. You know, it's pre-wig land, before she gets a wig of any kind. So, in some senses, I think she was completely steamrolled, run over, and an unfortunate soul. But she has a responsibility now to do big girly stuff. You know, if you're going to be a judge, Duchess, you're going to have to show your mettle occasionally, and that is having the courage and the largesse to admit you may have made an error, which is why I'm suggesting she proposes the public inquiry and flushes the shortcoming, the defect, flushes it out. So she should own up, basically, because she was involved and she knows who else was involved. She knows exactly that James Innes was signing matters instead of Ian Lang. Ian Lang's signature is absent throughout all the Skye Bridge paperwork and contracts. You don't see him. Crafty man.
He was the engineer, was he?
No. Ian Lang was Secretary of State.
Secretary of State, sure.
James Innes was a roads engineer.
He was the only guy who could produce legislation, who had the authority to act as if he was a parliament, an extension of Parliament. Only Ian Lang, as he was in the cabinet, and only a cabinet minister. He's the only Scottish cabinet minister. You've got signatures on places by James Douglas Hamilton writing legislation. Throughout these boxes I've got other examples. He's not allowed to write legislation. It's ultra vires, more ancient Italian, which means beyond his powers. Ultra vires, if you happen to see that. Surprising what you remember from an O-level.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. Yes, and Lord James Douglas Hamilton, of course, had Razzie connections. And he gave us I thought, the first time I heard him speak, I thought he was giving me a compliment. He called me a Luddite. I had to go look it up and find out what a Luddite was. But he was actually a very nice man.
I just say that with a straight face.
Well, he bought me a drink one time.
We're long-suffering Christians, we have to forgive.
Yes, we did. I did.
We don't forget, but we have to forgive.
So, anything you want to ask? I never thought I would be sitting in 2025 beside him talking about Skye Bridge. But there we go.
You still have a Skye Bridge.
We both lived long enough to do it.
Because the 27-year toll order was available to be renewed. They could have stuck another 27 years on toll order 2, had it been legal.
Yeah.
And we could have been getting it forever. And that's an expensive machine. It was ripping about 4 million out every year, and it would have continued. Now, 27 times 4 gets to be up there, doesn't it?
Yeah. There was an interesting, now hold on, I hope I'm right here.
Even
There was an interesting formula that had been concocted.
oh yes,
So you know what I'm talking about?
I remember the discounting
The
formula.
discounting formula due with the toast. Well,
I'll explain that very briefly. They had as part of the arrangement, the money was to be counted in Bank America mafia style, and that created a device, shall we say, whereby the value of your money was calculated to be discounting. So you hand over £1 and it only counted as 85 pence. And then the next year it counted as 80 pence. And then the next year it counted as 75 pence. And this went on. And this was adopted from Bank of America, or Bank America, you know, the purely. They're not ancient Italians, they're modern Italian. It's funny how they adopted the application of ancient Italian to keep us peasants in place. I haven't made that connection before. But anyway, this is the Romans. We sent the Romans home. And, you know, we're used to these people, the Romans. We deal with them. But they had this progressive devaluation of your money. How dare they? How dare they? Absolutely scandalous. That meant that the toll order may never come off. Because in 27 years, your pound was down to being worth a penny, or whatever. And that was going against your debt, you know, which was accumulating. So it doesn't work, just does not compute.
it was a very interesting system.
An interesting system if you're a mobster.
Yeah, yeah.
Donald, the Trump, he would like that. Yeah. He's
Maybe,
sort of the
should maybe
gangster.
check if he was a shareholder.
Yeah, he'd love it if he was a shareholder.
But that was one of the interesting things that came out of the whole thing, was that discounting situation. It means it would never have been paid off. So I suppose really that at the end of the day, if it hadn't been for the Scottish Parliament set up the way it is, or supposed to be, that you can never have a majority, and John Vacher Monroe hadn't been elected, we might still be paying the tolls.
Yes, I mean, John did his bit, kept asking me questions. They kept shoveling silly answers at him, but at least, you know, he was.
But they needed him to sign up to form the government. They needed all the Lib Dems at the time to sign it to become a majority, Labour and Lib. So if it hadn't been for him, it hadn't been for Celia going to court, and every time she went to court she had to buy a new outfit, he couldn't afford it anymore, so he had to sign the contract. That's what he told me himself one time anyway. So, but
And I would just like to repeat as campaigners, because we started this. I mean, he put the backbone into it. I came up with a suggestion and said, this doesn't look right. I'll investigate it, but I need some backing, you know. And this was the only councillor who said, right, I'm game for that. So credit to Drew, and that's the historical truth. You know, I was on my own until Drew came good, and he had the necessary gonads to say, right, I'll run with that. You get the legal thing examined, tell me about it, and basically he's saying, persuade me. So I did that, and he listened, and you know, they say things like the rest is history. It's not history yet, we're still doing it. This is a live issue.
I have to say though, Gavin Scott McGrief gave a lot of support, certainly to me, when we were arguing about it in Inverness. We had some interesting discussions. So, and this is the only man who was threatened at that, in my time in Inverness since 1996. The only This is the only man that was threatened by the convener of the council to have him ejected from the public benches because he started shouting about the Skye Bridge. So,
Worse things have happened to me.
yeah, I'm sure they have. Yeah.
Can I thank everybody for your support, your friends' support, because without the body of the kirk getting behind this, and we did that by having weekly public meetings, unheard of. A community going to sometimes a pub, but certainly a hotel, and sitting listening to constitutional law being argued, and then having the temerity and the courage to go out in numbers and follow a plan. And I think that is unheard of in recent centuries, and it's a huge example to the people of Scotland, and the Scot community has done that, and I thank them from the bottom of my heart for helping out, because I couldn't do that alone. I would have just been disposed of. It needed the body of the kirk, it needed the support, of people who held rank in the community, and you've done a wonderful thing, actually, all of you, and you deserve a round of applause for yourselves, and that's all I've got to say.
Can I just add as well that I don't think there's anybody on the island that doesn't owe scat, a debt of gratitude for getting rid of tools.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just finally see Robbie mentioned quite a few of the names. There were so many good people who put their careers at risk by refusing to pay and going to court. That Skye owes them a debt of gratitude, Katie, and a lot of them are not here anymore, and they've gone to another place, classed as criminals, when all they were doing was sticking up for people's rights. And you look back at our history in Skye, and I tell many tourists about the Battle of the Braes and the Martyr of Glendale, all these people. But people like, for example, Tommy Patterson from Dingwall, probably never did the wrong thing in his life. Mr. McDougall, the forester, who'd never been in trouble before. Dr. Toms, all these sort of people who really put their reputations on the line and have gone to another world as criminals when it really was grossly unfair. So that's me. So thank you very much for coming along tonight. It's been nice to have you all here, and onwards and upwards.